All right, the last of the quadratic formula. So we know what it is, but just in case you haven't been watching any of the videos over the last couple weeks, quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. Okay. And again, let's just do a recap. In order to use the quadratic formula, your equation must be in standard form. Okay, so that's ax squared plus bx plus c. And you're going to have it set equal to 0 because it's an equation. That equal sign tells you you're actually solving for a value. And then the nice thing is the quadratic formula always works. Okay, you will always get a solution. Now we've dealt with rational and irrational solutions. So your rational solutions are going to be your whole numbers and your fractions, something you can write as a ratio. Our irrational solutions had square roots in the answer. So we talked about simplifying the square root and simplifying those outside three numbers. Today, or for this particular lesson, we're going to look specifically at imaginary numbers, but know that eventually they'll all be mixed up and you have to be able to identify each of them. So imaginary solutions are going to be answers with an I. And for those of you that don't remember, anytime you take the square root of a negative number, so for instance, if I take the square root of negative 16, okay, I can break down 16, or I know that the square root of 16 is 4, right? I break it down to 4 times 4. There's my pair. So that pair comes out. This negative in a square root also comes out and becomes an I. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about imaginary solutions. So we're going to kind of just jump right in. Let's start with 3x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. Okay. So first things first, we want to make sure that we are in standard form, which we are. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we're going to identify our a, our b, and our c. A is 3, b is 2, c is 1. Okay. From there, we are plugging things into the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b is 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, one step at a time. We're going to simplify one thing at a time. So x equals negative times that 2 is just a negative 2, plus or minus the square root. Okay, so 2 squared gives me 4, and you're multiplying just across. So negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 times 1 is still negative 12. All over 6. Okay, keep simplifying. X equals negative 2 plus or minus. All right, so 4 minus 12 now is going to give me the square root of negative 8 all over 6. Okay. Now, just like in the last lesson when we had radicals, we still need to deal with the radicals. In this case, I know it's not a perfect square, but I can break it down. 8 breaks down to 4 and 2, and then 2 and 2. So I have a pair of 2's and a leftover 2. You'll also notice that you have this negative that's going to come out with it, right? That negative comes out and becomes an I, just like it did up here. So I have x equals negative 2 plus or minus. The 2 comes out. The negative becomes an I. And then my leftover 2 stays inside. all over 6. Okay. Just like in the last lesson, you are looking at your 3 outside numbers, and you are seeing if there is something that divides into all 3 of those numbers. So what goes into -2, 2, and 6? Hopefully you realize that it's a 2. So 2 goes into -2, -1 times. 2 goes into itself once, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. Okay, so x equals, I have to keep that -1. I can't lose that front one. So -1 plus or minus. Now, I can write the 1 next to the I if I want to, and in this case, I'm going to start there, and then we can always take it down if we don't want it. Square root of 2, so you don't need that 1, all over 3. Okay, so again, this is an acceptable answer. We have to keep that front -1, but if we don't want the 1 next to the I, that's okay. All right, let's do one more. Move this guy out of the way. Let's look at, how about 4x squared minus 10x plus 7 equals -3. Okay. And again, if you want to try this on your own, this would be a great time to pause the video. If you want to work it out with me, that's fine too. But here we go. All right, first thing I notice is that my equation is not set equal to 0, which means I'm not in standard form. So I'm going to start by adding 3 to both sides. Make sure that if you're going to move something from the right to the left, you combine it with its like term on the left-hand side. So this gives me a new equation of 4x squared minus 10x plus 10 equals 0. Okay. All right, let's identify A, B, and C. So A is 4, B is -10, C is +10. And I'm going to plug everything into my formula. X equals -b. Okay, so I have a negative that's in my formula. The b is -10. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is -10, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. All right, let's keep going. So a negative and a negative gives me a +10 now, plus or minus the square root. -10 squared is a +100. -4 times 4 is -16. -16 times 10 is a -160. All over 8. Okay. Keep simplifying. 10 plus or minus the square root. 100 minus 160 is a -60. All over 8. Okay, at this point, I'm going to simplify my radical. So two numbers that multiply to 60 are 6 and 10. 6 breaks down to 2 and 3. 10 breaks down to 2 and 5. And don't forget that negative that you have inside as well. Okay, so here I have a pair of 2's. They don't have to be right next to each other, but I have a pair of 2's. I have a leftover 3 and a leftover 5. And again, I have this negative that I'm going to pull out. So x equals 10 plus or minus. My pair of 2's comes out. My negative comes out and becomes an I. And left over I have 3 times 5, which is 15, all over 8. I'm going to look at the 3 outside numbers and see if there's a number that goes into 10 2, and 8. So is there a number that goes into 10, 2, and 8? Hopefully your answer is yes, and that answer is 2. So 2 goes into 10 5 times, 2 goes into itself once, and 2 goes into 8 4 times. So I'm left with 5 plus or minus, again, that 1 we don't have to write, but I'm going to do it if you want to. So 1i squared of 15 all over 4. And again, I'm going to take one final step because I don't really want to write that 1, but you can if you want. Both are acceptable answers. But 5 plus or minus I square root of 15 over 4 is going to be my final answer there.